part of why I'm doing this is for my own self-expression because I want to reach people, but it's also I'm trying to find people who can be philosophical activists. Our last session, we were talking about what is reality, and there are many philosophers who believe that what we see all around us, these physical things that we see, are not the final and deepest level of reality. The reason that it's important that we learn to see past the illusions is that a lot of what we're presented with in the world is illusionary. And that if we learn to see past the illusions, we can see things that are more stable. And I think that's especially true in the world right now, because I think a lot of what's going on in this world is illusionary. So it's not saying that it doesn't have real consequences and that people are not really suffering or people are not really in pain, people aren't really dying, but a lot of what we're seeing is theater, and it's theater meant to distract us. And you know, it's the case with a lot of the media is illusions, a lot of social media is illusions. There really is a lot of fake news out there, and sometimes things that really happen are still fake news. If I say don't pay attention to the news, it doesn't mean don't care. And it's not licensed to just sit on your sofa and let the world go to hell. What not paying attention to that stuff does is it should free you to do the work that you're supposed to do. And the reason it's important to not pay attention to the illusions is the illusions are the things that are stopping you from doing that work, and that work is very important. This session, we're going to talk about religion as technology. So there are a lot of different kinds of technology, and we live in a world that's increasingly technological. And there's a lot of things that are happening right now that were science fiction when I was a kid. So everything from self-driving cars to AI that can actually have a conversation with you, drones that fly overhead, even these little handheld computers that we have in our pockets, where we can see people at a distance. Those things were all science fiction during my childhood as it recedes increasingly far into the distance. The thing about technology is not necessarily a bad thing, but the boom in technology is also not necessarily a good thing. And one of the things is that it puts more and more power in the hands of people who are less and less able to deal with it. There's something that I call the power morality gap. And what it means is that if you're not a really great person, but you don't have a lot of power, it's not really a problem for anybody. And if you do have a lot of power, but you're a really, really good person, then you're probably going to use that power wisely. But if you're not a great person and you have a whole lot of power, then it has a really horrible impact on the world, which I think is kind of what we're seeing in our current leadership, is that we have a lot of people with a lot of power, but they don't have the maturity to use that power wisely. It's not just a problem of politics. It also becomes a problem when an ordinary person can get their hands on a weapon that can kill a lot of people in a very short period of time. There's really no scarier word in today's society than teenager with a weapon. And it's not that teenagers are bad people. It's that they don't have the maturity to have that kind of power. So the fact that technology keeps on advancing and advances quicker and quicker means that more and more power is in our hands, and we're not necessarily getting better as people. So that moves us towards a state of self-destruction. I think a lot of what we're seeing in the world right now is kind of self-destructive tendencies that are playing out as people have the power, have more of a destructive impact on the world. So I want to talk a little bit about other kinds of technologies, other than these kind of physical material technologies. And I also want to talk about other technologies other than information technology. So there are all kinds of different technologies in different arenas, and one is like emotional technologies. One thing that I was thinking about, if I think of emotional technology, is therapy. Okay. Therapy is kind of emotional technology. It's based on the science of psychology, and it's a way to help people work through emotional hurts. So that's an emotional technology. There are also mental technologies, and those are ways of training your brain. So A lot of those have kind of fallen by the wayside because we have computers to think for us now. So we don't use as many of the mental technologies, but people used to have ways where they could memorize huge amounts of information.
Or read fast.
Yeah, or read faster. Those are mental technologies. The ancient griots of Senegal and West Africa, they used to be able to memorize entire volumes of information. They did it by placing that in a musical form, and the musical form was easier to remember. Something that the ancient Greeks used to do was something called a memory palace, where you would imagine a structure that you had lived in at some point, and then each place it would go to in that structure would be a place where you would place an item that would remind you of something in your mind. They would all be mental. Religion, I would say, is a spiritual technology and it's a social technology. So, obviously, for people who are religious, the most important function of religion is to connect us with God. But there's a lot of things in religion that are not directly about God. One technique is what we call a creed or a credo. A credo is a structured statement of beliefs. And credos are really important because credos carry values. And a lot of times, people have the sense that the values they have are solid, they're stable, they're permanent, and they feel that the values are their foundation. And in some ways that's true, but actually people's values change all the time. And they change quickly. They change because other people's values change in a group. And a lot of times people don't even realize that their values have changed when they change. And I think we've seen that play out in the country. A lot of people's values changed overnight as administrations changed. And there are a lot of values that shift either to reflect current administration or as in opposition to current administration, if people feel differently the day after an election than they do the day before the election. Credos become important because they are written records of what you believe. So even if your values change, the credo stays constant. And it acts as anger, exactly. And what you'll find is that institutions that have strong values, those values are not just things that people carry around in their heads and their hearts. Those values are things that are spoken constantly. And so credo becomes very important because that helps that organization stay aligned to those values. And the challenge with anything philosophical is how do you take this very abstract thing and make it physical and bring it into the kind of material world, because the natural home of philosophy is this very abstract, idealistic realm. But in order for it to impact people, you have to find ways to bring it into the here and now. A lot of times you can tell when the values of an institution change when their credo changes. I think one example of a secular credo is when the company Google started. With Google is one of these huge multinational information technology firms. And when they started out, they had a very simple credo. Does anybody know what Google's credo was?
Don't be evil.
Don't be evil.
Apple.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about don't be evil is that they took it off their walls.
Oh, goodness.
So it used to be on all of their walls, and it used to be something that they would tell each other, don't be evil. And it's interesting that at some point, they actually went and removed the phrase, don't be evil. But it's interesting because you can mark a shift in values, and in that case, it's a very physical, easy to see shift in values. Another one that I found really interesting just happened recently, which is that the city of Washington, D.C. had a place where they had painted on the pavement, Black Lives Matter. And after the new administration came in, they actually literally went in with jackhammers and jackhammered that statement off the street. So it's a very physical representation of this is no longer a value that we believe in publicly.